in this clip, we will see how we can handle objects with multiple textures, and then we will see how we can refine our models by baking ambient occlusion within the texture. So here I am in Cinema 4D, and I have this object right here. And if you look at the structure right here, you can see it's fairly simple. So for now, let's just save the scene as it is. Okay, and go to Viz Artist, and let's import the scene. Now, as you can see, I have scenes to import here because this is a Cinema 4D scene, and Cinema 4D scenes are supported by Viz Artist. So let's import the scene. And let's open. Now we have some default materials here, so we can just delete them for now. And if I rotate the model and scale it a bit, you can see that we are having some serious issues with this object, especially this body object right here, right? So what's going on? What is the issue? Well, if you go back to Cinema 4D and go to this body object, you can see that we have different materials, right, with different selection tags. So the idea is that we can have material applied to a specific polygons, right, to a specific selection tag. Well, this is fine in Cinema 4D, but this doesn't really work in Viz Artist. We don't have that functionality in here, right? So how we can fix this? Well, it's actually really easy. What we need to do, we need to bake all of these textures into one texture. So let's go to Object, and then to Bake Object, right? And let's make sure that we have width and height. In our case, it's 1K, which is good enough. And then let's define the path where we would like to save the newly created texture. So in our case, it's just fine. So let's bake, okay? And now what Cinema 4D did, it actually baked all of these textures, all three textures, into one texture right here. And basically the old body is hidden now, and we have a new one right here. And if you go at this material for this object, you can see that there is no selection, which is exactly what we want. So if we delete those selections now, we can see that the object is fine. So let's drag and drop this object here, and let's keep the old one as a backup, okay? And let's save, and let's go back to Viz Artist and close, and let's import the new scene, replace, and delete the default materials. And as you can see, the object is fine now. It's due to the fact that we combined multiple texture into one texture. Now from here, let's say that we would like to do one more step. Let's say that we would like to refine these details over here, right? Let's say that we would like to have some shadows over here. Well, actually that can be done really easily in Cinema 4D. So if I go back to Cinema 4D, if I go to the rendering settings, I can enable the ambient occlusion, right? So I have the ambient occlusion here. Now it's really easy. If you don't have it, I can just delete it, and then I can enable the ambient occlusion, right? And let's just get a quick render without the ambient occlusion, and let's have one width. And you can see there is a massive difference between the two renders, right? But the problem is we can't have this ambient occlusion, right? We can't have this one because it is actually happening at the render time, and that doesn't really help us, right? We need to have this ambient occlusion enabled or baked within our texture. So let's just disable that for now. And let's go to the body, right? We have this new body that we've created just a moment ago, and let's delete it. And let's show the original one, and let's go to Object again and Bake Object. And this time, let's check the ambient occlusion option. So what will happen is that we will be having an ambient occlusion pass, and then another pass for the actual color, right? The actual texture. And this time, let's define a new folder for this texture. So let's make a new folder here in the text folder, and let's hit OK, and let's do a bake. So what Cinema 4D will do is basically it will create two textures, one for ambient occlusion and one for the actual texture. So if I go to the folder here, which is the Cinema 4D, and then texture, and then to the new folder, now we have an ambient occlusion pass, and then we have the actual color, right? And if you go to the actual material inside of Cinema 4D, which is this one, you can see that we have the surface color here in the color channel and the ambient occlusion within the diffusion channel. And if I render, so ambient occlusion is disabled, and if I render now, we have the ambient occlusion enabled within the actual texture without the need to enable it in the render settings, which is good. So what we have right now is one more problem that we need to fix. The ambient occlusion is basically enabled into the diffusion channel. Well, this doesn't really help us because we don't have a diffusion channel inside of VisArtist. Now remember, when it comes to VisArtist integration with Cinema 4D, we can use color and alpha only. We can't really use any of those channels, right? But we can actually fix that really easily by just go to the diffusion channel, and this is where we have the ambient occlusion, and let's just copy, okay, and let's hide the diffusion, and let's go to the color channel, and let's go to layer. So what we would like to do is to have two textures combined within one slot here, which is the texture, right? So let's go to the layer, and let's go to shader and paste the actual ambient occlusion, right? And since the ambient occlusion is just a grayscale image, we can just go and multiply it over the actual texture, which is the image here. So this is fine, but we can't really save this yet. We need to do one more bake, which is one last bake actually, because again, VisArtist doesn't support this layer system that we have in Cinema 4D. So let's go to this body over here, right? And let's go to object, bake object, and this time we don't need the ambient occlusion because we already have it now. Okay, and this time let's just save it into the actual texture folder. Okay, and let's hit bake. And now what we should get is one texture that contains the color and the ambient occlusion. So if I hit render, you can see we have it both texture. And even if I go to the texture folder right here, you can see I have the texture along with the ambient occlusion, which is good because this is what we need to send to VisArtist. So again, let's go to Cinema 4D, right? We don't need this body, right? Let's drag and drop this folder here, and let's delete those selections because we don't need them anymore. And let's save, and we can just clean the scene up just by remove the unused materials. Okay, and let's go to VisArtist again and re-import the scene. And let's double click and have the materials deleted. And as you can see, we have the ambient occlusion along with the texture itself. So this is how you bake textures along with the ambient occlusion. Thank you, and see you in the next clip.